Good evening from Wolfville and Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Spring has sprung in Annapolis Valley. The days are getting longer and brighter, and we are getting closer to welcoming our newest members to the alumni community, with the grad class of 2021 wrapping up their school year as we speak. My name is Una Proudfoot, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs in the Office of Advancement at Acadia. And it's a pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, Dr. Trevor Jane, class of 1993, who has kindly taken time out of his very busy schedule to chat with us about his remarkable career as a physician, trauma specialist, and member of the Canadian military. Before we get started, though, I always like to cover a few housekeeping items for folks on the line. We ask that you mute yourselves during the sort of bulk of the presentation, and also that you disable your cameras. We do ask, of course, or offer rather, an opportunity for everyone to ask questions if you have them. And you can do that in a number of ways. You most certainly can come off mute and engage your video camera if you wish to ask your question of our guest speaker this evening. You can also just unmute yourself and ask the question if you like. You can also launch the chat function, which is the wee icon that looks like a little text bubble, and just open that up and ask your question in the chat function, and I will keep an eye on that and pose the questions to our guest speaker if you'd rather do it that way. We have had a question submitted via the registration function as well. We've entered your names all into a draw, those of you who registered for this evening, and we did draw 3 names just in case the first or the second are not with us this evening, and that means we'll be sending you out some Acadia alumni branded fun stuff to thank you for joining us this evening. And now on to our guest speaker, Dr. Trevor Jane. Welcome. Dr. Jane grew up in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia, where he earned a BSc from Acadia. While still in high school, Dr. Jane joined the Canadian Armed Forces as an infantry soldier. He continued his studies in Halifax, where he obtained an MD from Dalhousie Medical School. During medical school, he was seconded by the military for the Swissair disaster to design, set up, and run the morgue as a pathology operations officer. He was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal of Canada for his efforts by the Governor General in 1999. Trevor attended University of Ottawa, where he completed family medicine residency and joined the Royal Canadian Medical Service branch in 2001. He also completed emergency medicine training at Queen's University. Dr. Jane has deployed to multiple austere locations, providing medical support to both armed conflicts and humanitarian operations. These experiences led him to develop a keen interest in disaster medicine. He completed his dive medicine and flight surgeon qualifications during full-time service with the Army. He recently returned from Northern Iraq as a trauma team leader. Dr. Jane was admitted to the Order of Military Merit Officer level in 2018. He holds his subspecialty in disaster medicine and is currently completing his PhD in this area. He has taught disaster medicine in Canada as well as Europe, and is program director for the BSc in paramedicine at UPEI. He is a regular contributor to CBC News on Talk with Doc. A warm welcome to you, Trevor, and many thanks for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's great to be here, and thanks for asking me, Una.
That's a great start. I mean, that just barely scratches the surface as well. So I'm hoping to pose a few questions to you this evening, Trevor, so that you can share a bit more around that wonderful biography that we just shared of yours. Give us some insight, give us some pointers, some ideas of what it's like to be Dr. Trevor Jane. Of course, we're going to talk about Acadia and the role that Acadia played in your life, where you are now, where you began, and all kinds of points in between. So you and I chatted a little bit prior to this. Yeah. So it's kind of like jump in, hold on, and let's go for a carnival ride in the next hour. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You know what? I know you well enough to know that you're gonna tell some stories and put some content around all of the questions that I ask you. So here's the curveball I'm gonna toss to you to start. So you have a full busy life, and it will be tough to cover it all in the next hour. But the first thing I'm going to ask you is, if you were asked to describe yourself briefly, what would you say?
If I was to describe myself briefly, well, I guess what I would say is that, you know what, I'm motivated and I'm curious. I think curiosity drives motivation. A lot of people would say that I'm crazy for some of the things that I do, and with time management. I like to think that I'm empathetic and kind. I think actually in today's society, that's a superpower that we should all strive to have, is kindness and empathy. And somebody who's friendly, who loves talking with people. I mean, the kind of Acadia kind of set me on that path, a very interactive social small university that really kind of fed my extroverted soul to connect with people. So I think that's what people would say. They might say I'm driven. Sometimes I think I'm lazy, but some people would say that I'm driven and friendly. And I think that's how I would describe myself. I don't
Uh,
know.
no, that's good. That's good. And I was just going to say, I'm going to come clean. If anyone's paying attention, you're the grad class of '93, and so am I. So,
Yeah,
we
yeah, we know each other.
So you know what? I thought, okay, let's be transparent here and let folks know that we do have a long relationship and a friendship together. And certainly those words are pretty accurate. And I'm going to call you out if you answer a question and I go, oh, that's not how I would.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so tell me about some of the roles that you fill, right? So, when you're filling out an application somewhere or something like that, and it says, what are your current roles? How do
Yeah.
you possibly fit everything into that box?
Yeah, so I mean, my career wasn't really a program career, and a lot of things whereby is when situation met opportunity. So when I try to leverage different things, and so that's what I tell kind of students and people and even colleagues that I work with. And sometimes they say, how do you kind of do the things that you do? And one of the things that I say, I try to use synergetic energy for one thing. So I'll give you an example. So for the if you're doing a research paper, if you're a research project, how can you leverage that project to do three things? So, emergency medicine for me has opened up the doors to pre-hospital medicine, and it's kind of the sharp end of medicine for disaster medicine. So it was kind of a natural fit, and those kind of and it's a fit for the reserve work that I do with the military occasionally is emergency medicine. So by picking one theme or framework, you have all these little uh, side pathways that branch from your core. And so sometimes it looks like you're doing multiple different things, but when you delineate down and drill down, they're actually kind of all related. So, Emerge lets me do pre-hospital medicine. Pre-hospital medicine lets me do disaster stuff. That lets me do armed forces stuff. And I kind of really try to use synergism to if I do something or if I do a project, how can I force multiply it in different parts of my life for effect. So that's kind of what I try to tell my students sometimes, and try and it lets life become a little bit more enjoyable because it frees up more time.
Good advice. And
Yeah.
and what you said, really sort of, as you pointed out, it comes down to who you are in your core, right? Who you are as a being, and so everything that you do, as you say, is connected in one way or the other. So how does all of that connect with Trevor, a person in your home life? Tell us a little bit about what your home life looks like in terms of family and what you got going on. I want you to introduce your family to us, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I married a Newfoundlander. So yeah, exactly. So I married a townie, a girl from St. John's, Newfoundland, who has a very strong personality, and which is good for me. And I have twin daughters that are highly motivated. So sometimes, with the things that you do with your career, like family's first. And so when I'm home, I try to be in the moment. I try to be present, and I try to be attentive. So sometimes people get concerned about the amount of time, and I always think it's about the quality of time. So I might not be as home as much as other fathers or husbands, but certainly when I am home, I try to be in the moment and try to be there. And I certainly could not do any of the things that I could do without my wife. There's just no way. She's my fire team partner, as we would say, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to segue into some Acadia specific questions, but before
Sure.
I do that, I'm just going to drop into the conversation that we'll be sure to get some teenage-sized Acadia gear in the mail. Just not
Okay,
for
good, awesome.
persuasions or anything over there on PEI, but we'll send some influence. So Acadia in general, it was a long time ago that we were there.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about. I know one of the big themes that came out of Acadia for you, or that you kind of put in the same sentence with Acadia, is mentorship. So tell me a little bit about how important mentorship was in your Acadia experience.
Yeah, Una, I would say that I didn't do well the first 2 years at Acadia. I came out of high school with just above average marks. I was blessed that Acadia, I scraped by to get into Acadia. And the first 2 years, I was young and kind of finding myself, and maybe like going to the Axe a little too much, and the exit tens, for those that remember the exit tens, and meeting people, and not so much meeting and dating my books as much as I should have been. And any other university, I'm fully convinced, any other university, um, certain profs wouldn't have taken an interest. And I was very lucky. I had a few profs. Dr. Gibson, I believe his daughter's now is teaching in biology, or was teaching in biology. Dr. Hilda Taylor was a big mentor of mine. She was a professor in biology, and she basically took me aside in second year and said, you know what? You have potential, but you need to get focused, and you need to give up a few things. And here's how I can help you. And you can actually probably qualify for a few scholarships if you turn yourself around. And, without that one conversation, there was a few other influences. Without friendships, like I met incredible people like yourself. I met incredible people at Acadia, that kind of kept each other accountable. And I wasn't mainstream Acadia, but there was a group for everybody, if that makes sense. So that's what I really liked about it. And without Dr. Taylor's mentorship and my parents' support, my path would have been totally different. And if you had saw me second year, which you did, in my BSc, and I told you, I think someday I want to be a trauma team leader in acute care medicine, you'd be like, big smile on your face and say, good luck, because you got to kind of turn things around. So I guess what I'm saying is, Acadia has a very special place in my heart, and I would encourage that, everybody's experience is different. You might be an athlete at Acadia, you might be a football player, you might be in music, you might be in computer science or business. Every experience is unique, but the common thread, I would say, is that I believe you can always find a prof that you're going to connect with that will take an interest. And what was interesting about Dr. Taylor, Una, I never took a class from her. She just saw me in the biology building, and kind of asked her, who's that guy, and that's Trevor. He's not, not doing as great as he could. And because of her mentorship, and a few other influences, I turned it around. I went from barely passing to straight A pluses, third and fourth year. And that I owe it to that type of leadership within the institution, for sure.
Yeah. And it's you tell a very similar story to mine, right?
Yeah.
Clearly not a trauma doctor and didn't go that route, but absolutely that sort of, it's somebody seeing promise in you and having that conversation and making
Yeah.
that connection. Absolutely.
Yeah, and exactly, like seeing potential and just having a conversation. And I would say to the professors, if I could go back in time, never doubt how one or two sentences will have an impact on somebody. On your worst day as a prof, you might turn somebody around by just one or two sentences. So that's so I I look on those days fondly, and I was very honored to be asked to speak. So yeah.
Incredibly powerful. You're absolutely right. So one more Acadia specific question. How did Acadia and its military history support or guide you as you pursued your undergraduate degree? Was there any sort of connection there for you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of it's kind of a little known secret, like, but Acadia has a long military affiliation. So whether I'm not going to say pro or negative military, whatever people's political stance are. The fact of the matter is, Acadia did generate soldiers and generated officers for various conflicts, and proud Acadia alumnus. And there was a group of us that were in the reserves, and about seven of us from all different. I think I was the only science student. Yeah, I was the only BSc student in this group of seven, and we're friends today. And not only was it our bond in the military, but it was all because we're Acadia grads. Like, I mean, we still talk about Acadia. So we had this double bond. We had this bond with being in the reserves, training at Camp Aldershot, and the regiments in Nova Scotia still draw upon Acadia students as leaders. So, and some very high profile leaders. The new commanding officer of the West Nova Scotia Regiment, for those history buffs, which is located right in the valley, is an Acadia grad, Mike Bobbitt. He's taken over command in June. He graduated 2 years behind me. So Acadia's had a long military history, and because of that, there's scholarships and bursaries and stuff that named after some famous soldiers, and that gave you access to those things. So it's unique, for me, and I liked Acadia too with regards to the military, because I could be in classes with people that were anti-military, but we could have a discussion and go to the Axe and have a beer after, and still work on projects together. And that doesn't happen in a lot of different institutions. And I kind of like the fact that it happened in Acadia, that you could disagree and with those type of things. So, yeah.
Terrific. So from there, you went on to medical school
Yeah.
at Cal. And so you started at medical school. Was that right after Acadia? And tell us a little bit about your time there, and what started to evolve into disaster management when you were there.
Yeah, so great question. So I took a year and did some research at University of Prince Edward Island before I went to medical school. Got accepted and went to medical school. And Acadia traditionally has been very successful with applicants from Acadia to professional schools, other professional schools. My apologies. So when I was at Dal, believe it or not, I was on my way to be a plastic surgeon, and not like cosmetic. I was interested in facial reconstruction, burn surgery, and that sort of thing. And Dalhousie Medical School, though, was part of Dalhousie, it's still its own kind of school. We didn't really socialize with other aspects of the campus. The students were generally older. And in fourth year, on September 3rd, 1998, you have to remember, nobody had computers in their house hooked up to the internet. Things were still done by TV and phone. And I was studying for a psychiatry exam, and Swiss Air happened. So I got a phone call in my fourth year of medical school, and I was seconded by the Armed Forces, and their Mounties, the RCMP, showed up at my apartment at 2:30 in the morning, took me over to Hangar B at Shearwater, and because I was a pathology assistant, so I had some pathology training at the Valley Regional Hospital. That's how I got my interest, and I did that while I was going to Acadia, volunteering at the hospital. They asked me to help design and set up their morgue. So that put me on a path down the disaster road. How do you manage chaos? How do you manage something horrific that's happened to wonderful people, and get on with the job of investigating, managing, and doing those things. So yeah, so that's kind of how I shifted in fourth year med school. And when I could have failed medical school because I missed 8 weeks of medical school, and again, it comes down to leadership and mentorship. And there was another professor, Dr. St. Marie, who was the dean of the medical school. And when I came back from the Swiss Air, I missed 7 weeks of medical school, and she says, "Trevor, I want you to take a week off to recover, and we're going to count those 7 weeks as a medical rotation, so you can graduate with your class." She didn't
Wow.
have to. So, Yeah, sorry, I kind of got long-winded there, but I was trying to know how much detail you wanted, but that's how I got shifted to
Oh,
the disaster side and
yeah.
again, mentorship by props, right? So
Well, and how wonderful, because I mean, obviously, as somebody who's been at a university for so long and done my fair share of teaching, I mean, what a hands-on learning that you
yeah,
had, that intensive seven
yeah,
weeks. So
yeah,
go,
and
that would make,
in the skill set.
yeah,
Yeah, 100%. So absolutely, you're right. As somebody who's taught students yourself, you know that practical experience. She saw the big picture. Like, I'm not going to get that experience anywhere else, and so it's medical. Let's count it. So, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So a different type of doctor that you're pursuing right now. You're pursuing a PhD. Because you've got some time on your hands doing
yeah,
nothing else.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your area of research and what you plan to do with that.
Yeah, so really interesting. I find it interesting. I love it when students say, "Oh, it's really interesting to me." But I'm using UAV technology, so drone technology, and the use of mass casualty incidences by EMS services. So that's the overall theme. So basically, I'm using drones and analyzing how they can be used effectively by EMS services um, in mass casualty incidences and or mass gatherings. What's really interesting about the research my group is doing is that we're the first ones in the world to do randomized comparisons. So lots of people have done case studies and have published. We've used a drone to find somebody who's lost. We've used a drone to see if somebody's stuck in a fire, in a house that's on fire, using thermal, that type of thing. But we're the first ones to actually measure variables. So we've done things like we created a car accident, a 10-car pileup on an abandoned runway, and analyzed paramedics going through that with real casualties and real hazards. We've used the Cavendish Beach Music Festival, 26,000 person beach festival, and used drone technology to measure different variables for medical folks, what they would want to know. And it's kind of cool because our research was featured on the Discovery Channel. So the Discovery Channel got wind of it and said, "Trevor, do you mind if we send down, an interviewer?" And so it was featured on the Daily Planet. And yeah, so it's really been really been interesting. And the idea literally came around that I was flying a drone that I got for Father's Day in my backyard, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, EMS could really use this," and that's kind of how it kind of branched out. So yeah,
So back to that comment about how everything in your life is connected in one way or another, right? Uh,
100%.
Also mildly amused that you're now talking about drones and that you've come a long way from the time when it was TV and phone, and that's how,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
how they
yeah, exactly.
contacted you in 1998, right? And now you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay, so now you're
yeah,
getting texts and drones are
yeah,
flying over and you're getting,
yeah,
picked up. I remember you telling me the story about getting picked up in one of the massive snowstorms on PEI. Getting a plow
snowplow.
swings up by your
Yeah,
door, picks you up, and brings you to work. I mean,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, okay, so I'm gonna go a little segue away for a little
sure.
bit, 'cause you were talking about drones, and this is maybe a bit of a lesser known fact, and I don't know that I mentioned it in your biography, that you're also, on top of everything else, a pilot. So, did you ever consider a more specific career with the Air Force versus the Armed Forces, and do you still fly? And is it leisurely, or what are you doing in
Yeah,
the?
yeah. So I still fly. Yeah, so I'm fly a multi IFR twin engine aircraft. It's my therapy. I say I do it for fun. But when I was 17, I was going to be a snowbird pilot. That was my goal. I was going to do ROTP and I was going to be a snowbird pilot. And we were talking about technology, but that time in 1987, I went to get the eye exam and I failed, so I needed glasses. Fast forward, if I had the same eye condition that I had and I was 17 in 2021, you can go get surgery and 6 months later apply for the Air Force. So yeah, so there was some thought. I toyed with the idea of maybe being a commercial pilot, and I did. So I did become a commercial pilot, and I worked on my commercial pilot's license in the summer times. And I worked for a really, really small company. We did small charters around Nova Scotia, and we talked about how everything's related. That gave me a certain appreciation and skill set for the Swiss Air disaster. So when I was in the morgue recognizing airplane parts, Kapton wiring, switches, and that type of thing while we're trying to delineate the remains from the airplane. It it's funny how all your life experiences can help you if you draw upon them. So yeah.
So what? Here's a random one, another random one. Just hold on with me as I take in a bunch of different directions with no apparent thought. It makes sense in my head though. So what makes someone successful? Let me throw that one out there and just say, you've already told us little bits about sort of various aspects of your life. And that's kind of where my head is at now, is kind of getting maybe a little bit more into the philosophy behind it, or maybe the practicality behind it all. Talk to me a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think what makes people successful are two things: grit and staying hungry. And what I mean by that is that it's okay to be. So if you're content, that's fantastic, right? That's fantastic. But if you want to do something, and I believe that those people that have grit are the ones that are going to be successful, because you're going to come up to roadblocks. If you tell people that you want to do something cool, a group of people are the first ones to tell you you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to fail. Even your friends, and not in a bad way. They just, they for whatever reason, um, they might give you all the reasons why it's not going to happen. And what I would say is what separates people who are successful for those people that maybe are not as successful as they want to be is that grit and staying hungry. And once you've achieved your goal, what's your next goal? And that's what I mean by staying hungry. And it kind of makes sense to me. And everybody's got to find their own thing, what works for them. But for me, it wasn't easy. It wasn't like, went to Acadia, got straight A's, went to med school. I had some horrific experiences in my life, to get where I am, that I wouldn't want anybody to go through. And but you never give up, and you got to have grit. That's what I would say.
I can see you wearing that.
It'd be a very short book, Una. It'd be a very short book if I wrote it.
That's what I mean. That's why you should just go the t-shirt route. You got to have grit.
Yeah.
And there you go. You're done. Forget the book.
Yeah.
Just get the t-shirt, right? Yeah. Tell us about a particular experience that you've had that has perhaps brought about the most learning, or maybe the most reflection for you.
Yeah. So I guess a couple things. What I would say, feeling valued in a team environment, I think, is so important. Growing up as a biracial child in junior high, it was hard. I was bullied and I felt really devalued. I had projects destroyed and homework destroyed. And it wasn't really until I joined the Army that I kind of found my folks. And at Acadia, I never experienced that. I just didn't. I'm not saying it because I'm on here. You know me. I would tell you if I did. So from those experiences in junior high and high school, I realized the pain of feeling devalued can cause people. And but I really use it to my advantage in any team environment. I make sure that everybody that in my vicinity framework for whatever I'm doing, whatever task, feels valued, because they are valued. And and everybody's important. We had a cleaner in the morgue in Hangar B. And because it's a high stress environment and each of us were in our teams doing our own thing, this cleaner, we had one cleaner, was cleaning the autopsy suites. And I remember exactly what he looks like: gray bushy mustache, little older gentleman, my age now, right? Back then. And he was alone. And I went up to him and I said, I want to thank you for what you're doing, because without your cleaning protocols, we wouldn't have legal standards of autopsies. And we really appreciate it. My team saw me talking to him and they said, well, who's that? And I said, I explained. And it wasn't because anybody was purposely being rude. They were just so focused. The next day, like they were talking to him. It was just a different vibe from him. He felt brought in. Felt value, and I've always kind of taken that with me. That anything that we see, it's not about the person on TV. In the pandemic, there's a whole team behind what people are on TV. So that's a long-winded answer, but I really want to hammer it home that everybody is valued for what they bring to the table, no matter what the skill set. So no matter the size of the cog. So if it's a small cog or a big cog in a machine, that cog breaks, machine ain't working. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's a line that a past VP of mine used to say, when somebody was being interviewed in the space Challenger space shuttle scenario, and he's sweeping the floor, and he was asked the question, what do you do here? And he says, we're putting people on the moon. And right, exactly to that point. I mean, to hear that story, Trevor, and to hear that living proof of understanding that everyone has a role to play. And you and I have talked about empathy and kindness, and you mentioned it when I said to you at the very beginning. I said, "Tell me about who you are," and those are two words that keep coming up in your story, and when I speak with you, just so tell us a little bit more about, if you were giving words of advice maybe to somebody on how to employ those things and how to embrace them and just make the world a better place with those two things.
Yeah, I think what I would encourage Brian Goldman from White Coat Black Art, CBC, his book really impacted me, and I would encourage anybody that you pick up this power of kindness. Oh my God, there's no power behind it. Well, there actually is, and he describes it the best. I'm not going to do it justice, but he's actually given concrete samples from around the world. About the power of kindness and empathy, and just having that connection with somebody. And it doesn't mean that you're a doormat. Like people say, oh, I'm kind to everybody. No, that doesn't mean that you're giving all your money away, your assets. It doesn't mean that you're totally changing your life. Just small micro moments of interacting with people, it'll provide you with a really cool connection that will actually feed your soul. And I think that I've said it during this COVID. I call my folks COVID warriors in my province, and I tell them, I said, a COVID warrior superpower in this pandemic is kindness. Everybody, and you'll know when it happens. So I encourage people to read that book, concrete examples, and if you practice a little bit each day, you'll be a happier person. That's what I would say.
Well, it's amazing how it breeds it, right? A little bit of it, just if that seed is planted, and it just grows, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned CBC in the answer to that one. Tell us how that evolved into. Tell us about Talk with Doc and how that started.
Yeah.
We'll talk a bit about that now.
Yeah. So I'm a bit. Those people that know me, I'm very transparent with what I say. I'm not scared to give my opinion, whether the people agree with it or not, and I put it out there. So with social media, I would comment on the healthcare system, regardless of the political stripe or government of the day, and give my opinion as a citizen in Canada and a citizen of Prince Edward Island. And a lot of times, it generates some controversy and some good, healthy back and forth and dissent, which I think is excellent in a democracy. So during the COVID, when the pandemic kind of kicked off on the 17th of March, I was seconded to the hospital of 17th of March of 2020 to be the disaster medicine consultant for our hospital systems. And we had to do a number of things. My CBC asked to interview me for that, and the main anchor for our province did the interview. And after that interview, she asked me a couple more times, and then it kind of evolved that she said, would you like to be a regular contributor? And initially I said no, because they want to be on every 2 weeks and I didn't need anything else to do.
Yes.
But she's yeah, but she's persistent. And I talked to a few other physicians across Canada who do some media engagement, and they said you should go for it. So I went through the pros and cons and the good, bad, and the ugly, and that's how it came about. So I agreed to once a month, and for the at least for the next year. So it's been 2 years coming up to this will be my second year, and it's been fun. It's awesome getting questions from the public because it gives me a different perspective as a physician. What I think is important, maybe medically, but a lot of times that's not what the public thinks is important, and they're the patients. So we have to cater to what they want to know about. So yeah, it's been enjoyable.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear that it's enjoyable and fun. So do you have any sort of stories of, oh, I remember the time that I got asked this, or did you ever get like sort of completely, oh, gobsmacked or dumbfounded and didn't know how to answer, or has it been going smoothly and well for you?
It's been going smoothly, but I do get I do get questions. It also makes me research, so I can anticipate some of the questions that I get, and I can do. It is live, but I do get the questions about an hour and a half before it goes live.
Mhm.
So I can anticipate by watching the news. It makes me more intuitive of the news cycle, the medical news cycle, and then I can anticipate some questions. So far, I've been okay.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood. Yeah.
So I'm glad you appreciate getting your questions for that an hour and a half beforehand. Folks on the line, Trevor's getting these out of left field. So
Yeah.
there was no prep time available awarded to him on this one.
Yeah.
So we're chatting about COVID. Trevor, I know you don't have a crystal ball. At least I don't think you have a crystal ball. What do you think the next little while looks like for your province, for our province, and for the world in terms of COVID?
Yeah, so great question. So Canada right now, it's I find it interesting that a lot of the media goes to Toronto for their subject matter experts when we have geographically diverse subject matter experts all through Canada. So this is what I would say. I believe COVID is four waves, and I believe that we're still in a big wave with peaks and valleys. So it's semantics. So people are calling this, the third wave.
Yep.
It's been a year. This is the acute illness. So the acute illness is coming through. It's the first wave. The second wave are those patients that white knuckled it at home with chronic illness that didn't come in with their chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, didn't come in with their chest pain, didn't come in, oh, look, I got a lymph node here. They delayed diagnosis. The third wave are brand new illnesses that they didn't see primary care for. And the fourth wave, which is the most, in my mind, the wave that's going to be the largest and have the greatest impact on Canadian society, is going to be mental health. It's going to be caregiver burnout. It's going to be depression, anxiety, loneliness. It's going to be a mass exodus of healthcare providers, not from their work, but seeking care, their own care. So that's kind of how I picture COVID in four waves. The pandemic will go. It's not going to go like this. There will be a gradual decrease. We'll have endemics, which are little pop-ups for a while. So you might have a pop-up in the UK or a pop-up in the States somewhere, pop-up in Canada. But the pandemic will end. It's just not going to end as fast as we want it to end.
Right.
Right. And then, some thought that maybe we might need a COVID vaccine once a year, a booster. There's some thoughts by certain immunologists that this could even turn into a childhood illness, and that you bring your 4-year-old in and said, "Oh yeah, it's got a high fever and cold-like symptoms," and they test him, yeah, he's got COVID. So it could even become a childhood illness. So lots of unknowns, but I do know this: it will end.
Well, there we go. We're going to wrap it up on that. No, I'm just kidding. Well, and having someone so highly regarded and respected, Trevor, I love that answer that it will end. I appreciate the waves that you've identified, and I want to talk a little bit more about the fourth wave, the mental health wave that you talked about. But before I do that, I just want to remind folks on the line. I know I am hogging all the question time. It's not fair. So please launch your chat function and type a question in there. I will keep an eye on it. And I'll pose the question for you if you are not comfortable doing that yourself. We did our way back. Trevor got an initial comment in the chat function. It was not a question, but it was from My colleague, when you said that you married a Newfoundlander, she's also from St. John's. So
There
you're
you go.
by us, and she says, "Good on you, bye."
Good,
So
good.
that's from my colleague Nancy. So folks, please answer or please pose your questions in the chat function so that I can give you some airtime. I realize I'm hogging the airtime right now. So mental health. So, I in all my conversations with you, and certainly a little more frequently recently, mental health always seems to be something that comes up in the conversation. It either creeps into the conversation, you purposely bring it up in the conversation. You are clearly an advocate for the importance of mental health and the whole big picture in terms of one's overall health and wellness. You've just mentioned it in terms of the importance of it being sort of identified as that fourth wave. You can't turn CBC radio on these days and not hear, a story or an interview with folks talking about all of these, Zoom fatigue and
Mm-hmm.
loneliness and all of these things that are playing on us and wondering what the world is going to look like. So all of that said, um, you know, I'm going to ask first, if I may, a personal question about your mental health and sort of
Mm-hmm.
where it is now with you and where it's been over the years. I mean, you've as you said and shared some with us, seen some pretty horrific things and experienced some pretty horrific things. So how do you manage yours? You said you fly. You said that's your therapy. That's I'm sure there's a lot more. But tell us a little bit about your mental health, and then I'm going to ask you a little bit about it in terms of the bigger picture as well.
Yeah. So I think, the kind of the experiences I went through junior high and high school um, have created calluses on my brain with different things. I've done 7 deployments and been in some nasty places. But seeing injured people, like, trauma that you rarely see in Canada, but it was a regular occurrence overseas. And what I would say is this: is that you don't walk away unscarred. So, I mean, I had issues after Swiss Air. I mean, I had issues. I mean, I still do, and I'm open about it. And I think we need to be open about it. To keep getting rid of the stigma. And I will walk down the street in the middle of Charlottetown and all of a sudden smell jet fuel, and there's no planes flying, right? Or I'll go to shake somebody's hand and I'll start a mental dictation of that hand, 45-year-old male, gold ring, because that's what we did, Swiss hair, for over and over and over dictations. So so it's something that you work on every day. I mean, it's a dark passenger that never leaves your shoulder, that you really gotta look after yourself, and be honest with yourself. So, if you need help, you got to get it. You got to talk to colleagues. Everybody in Canada, everybody in their lifetime, at least once, is going to have a mental health issue. Once. That's just the way it is. So the brain's just like the heart and lungs. When it gets injured or has something wrong with it, the things you can do to help it, to help it heal. So that's just one example, and it's made me a better person. It's become, it's made me an advocate for mental health patients in my practice in the emerge department. It's made me less judgy. We're so quick to judge. Eye rolling. When people say, "Oh, I have PTSD," or depression or anxiety or bipolar. I'm going back to a little bit of empathy and kindness, and for the grace of God, each of us could be in those shoes. And um, so, I think awareness. I think we're much farther ahead. I mean, back in the '90s, you didn't talk about it in the Army, right? You just did it. You know what I mean? Like, I managed 2,000 body parts the last 4 weeks. Oh, really? How was that? Well, it wasn't that great. Oh, well, so, and I continue to deploy after that. So I think it's made me a better leader. It's made me a better follower. It's made me a better physician, and I think it's made me a better person. And I think it's all part of our lives, and it's not going anywhere. So we might as well embrace it and help each other.
Yeah. And Trevor, you have one of the main characteristics that helps in this whole conversation about mental health, and that's your candidness and your candor and your, like you
Yeah,
said, I'll talk about it. I'm transparent. What do you want to know? And
yeah,
you'll call it as it is. You'll make your comments. And see what happens. And you're not afraid to make a comment and have a conversation about it, right? And so appreciate that. And I'm sure that has done you well, or at least I hope that has done you well
yeah.
time and time again in your career and in your life. So many different places I want to go from that answer. The next question I did have lined up on the mental health category was posed by somebody who has since joined us, and she has written it as well in the chat function. So the question, just give me a second here. So the question was submitted is, what is the future of mental health in the Canadian Armed Forces? Do you see any changes coming down the pipeline in the way of the Canadian and in the way the Canadian Forces addresses mental health? And subsequent to that, she says, I've joined a few minutes late, so not sure if the question I had sent has been addressed. We are doing that now. So great timing. She says, sir, military spouse here. How do you see the future of military mental health shaping up? Do you agree with the trend of outsourcing to local psychologists and psychiatrists, or do you see a great need for CIF clinicians as members, not cities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what I should say is that soldiers that suffer mental health issues, it's a family disease. It's not a soldier's disease. The spouse is affected, the kids are affected. And let's extrapolate that to the Canadian public. So if you have a family member that's mentally ill, you're collateral. Like you got collateral medical issues from being involved with that family member, trying to help them. It's devastating to families. Um, so what I would say is this: my experience, I've been in the Canadian Armed Forces 34 years. And what I can say is that we've come leaps and bounds from where we were. Before you never talked about it, and now it's part of your pre-deployment screening. There's tons of supports available. Can we do more? 100%. I mean, I should make it clear, I don't speak for the Canadian Armed Forces, but as a reservist, as a physician, what I would say is we can always do more. With second part of that question, should we outsource or insource clinicians? I don't care. I just want clinicians. So I don't care if they wear the uniform or not. If they're good at their job, knowledgeable, and they want to look after fellow Canadians, I don't care if they wear a uniform or not. With regards to care, if they're motivated, knowledgeable, that's what we need. And just to dovetail on that, I do acknowledge that mental health is a family. It's a family process. It's a family disease.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that empathy, that kindness, that awareness, and that ability to speak about it, right? Because often
Yeah.
when it creeps in, it's sort of that lump in the breast that people just want to ignore, right? It's just
Right.
we're just going to park that over there, and if we don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So being able to say, you see a problem, or I have a problem, or what have you. The response in the chat function says, my spouse has PTSD. I agree there, sir, and great response, and thank you. So that's from the chat function. And just before that question, you have another one from a guest on the line who says, have you seen many Acadia grads in your career and adventures? So you did mention in the military that you had a group of 6 or 7. So maybe sort of speckled along the way since then.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So there's Acadia grads everywhere. So if you thought that I would be in the northern Iraq sitting down to have some eggs and bacon and a cup of coffee out of a Melmac cup at a mess, and then sit across from somebody who's my age and get talking, and they're like, oh yeah, I was at Acadia in 90. What? You were at Acadia in 91, and then where did you stay? Were you in the barracks? Were you in Eaton House? Were you in the apartments? Did you go to Joe's? Were you down at the Anvil? So everywhere. So I mean, the deputy division. So I'm sorry, I'm putting Army side on now, but the deputy division commander, so the commander of the Army for the East Coast, is an Acadia grad. Graduated with me. There's grads that are commanding multiple units, multiple ships. There's Acadia grad that I just did a mission in the fall on a Chinook helicopter with 2. It's a large helicopter. We can look after 3 critical injured soldiers. We're on 2 different comm systems. I look up to the pilot. The pilot looks at me, thumbs up, big smile on her face. Not only did we go to high school together, but we graduated Acadia together, and then did a fist pump at the end of the mission because we couldn't talk to each other, it was so loud. But so and then in medicine, I run into Acadia grads everywhere in medicine. CBC. So the producer who read my bio goes, "Oh my gosh, I graduated from Acadia in '92." So yeah, we're everywhere. That's Acadia's everywhere, and that's a good thing.
Well, and you know what? I appreciate the question from Leah. I'm gonna go in even further and ask you straight up: when you are walking around UPEI campus, are you wearing any Acadia swag, or are you like flying under the radar?
My jacket doesn't fit. my daughters can wear my jacket because it's very classy, but it doesn't fit anymore. You send me some Acadia swag, I gladly wear it. There's a few Acadia grads that are profs at UPEI too. So you see the A. You see the A.
We'll get you geared up, absolutely. Oh, it says the comment is jacket doesn't fit from all the PT time, right?
Yeah, we'll go with that that comment. I appreciate the kindness. That's exactly why.
Exactly. There's your kindness. So we're getting near the end of our time. I'm not surprised. I'm still gonna ask it a couple of more times if there's questions in the chat function. But since we're talking about Acadia again, I mean, go figure. It is my job after all. What would you say or advice would you give to current students studying at Acadia today?
I would say my advice to students of Acadia today is that you're just getting started. Have faith in the education process that Acadia's given you, not just that piece of paper, but all the unmeasurable variables that Acadia's given you, your interactions, your experiences, your relationships, your organizations on campus, your athletics, your music, whatever you're doing, and soak it in. Don't be too hurried to graduate. Yeah, don't be too rushed to graduate. And it's cliche, but enjoy the journey. Yeah, enjoy the journey.
And I'm glad we're recording this because I'm going to play that for both of my sons, both of whom Trevor knows, for the folks in the audience.
Yeah, when they were this small, Una, I actually
tiny little things. Well, the older one is graduating this year, so I'll be able to play that too for him and share that advice with him. So, what, if anything, would you say to high school students considering Acadia?
Oh, I would say that it's a no-brainer. Listen, if you want a fantastic education, a fantastic foundation, you want to get out of your high school. High school wasn't what it was for you, or if you think your experiences weren't where it was, and you're a little down, Acadia will turn you around. And that first week on campus, you got to embrace everything. So have new experiences. Acadia is the school to do it. It's I love my time there. Incredible people there. Still incredible people there, and I highly would make it my number one. And I'm not saying that I'm socializing my twin daughters to go to Acadia, but they'll be contacting you, Una, soon. So yeah.
Well, and Trevor, what I appreciate about that in all kinds of levels that I appreciate it, but the fact that you grew up in the Valley, went to high school in the Valley, and then went to university in the Valley. But what I'm hearing from you is that your university experience was a very different experience than your high school experience. And as I said, both my sons are doing the same thing, right? Grew up in the Valley, high school in the Valley, and they're going to Acadia. And it's a different experience. It's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, when I was in medical school, so I'm at Dal, 30,000 students. The medical school is like a small school, so it felt very small to me. But when I talked to my colleagues who went to Dal for their undergrad, for their BSc or their BA or music or whatever, it certainly wasn't spoken with the fondness that us Acadia grads had. So there just wasn't that bond, that experience. So I think for life lessons, for a foundation to set you up for success, it's a fantastic institution. And it should be your number one choice. But I'm biased.
Yeah, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. We're going to take your bias.
It should be your number one choice, and I still recommend that today. So, I have high school students here that talk to me, reach out about medicine, and I say, hey, listen, you want a solid education, go to a university. I would suggest Acadia.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna quote you, and we're gonna sign off on being able to use that quote, and we're gonna be using it. So a couple of housekeeping items before we do the formal wrap up. And I mentioned at the beginning that we have a draw prize, and the winner of the draw prize this evening, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the engagement and the number of questions that you've been asking. Callie, thank you for engaging with us. But your name was drawn before the beginning of this session as our winner of the swag items that we'll be sending you. So how fortuitous that that you were engaged and asked those questions of our guest speaker, of Dr. Jane. Second point of interest, or at least I hope it's a point of interest, is our next virtual event will be on April 26th, and it is with Dr. John Sokolowski, who is with our Languages and Literatures Department at Acadia. And the title of the event is Imagining Ourselves Otherwise, the Value of Video Games as a Humanities Research Tool. So hopefully we'll see some of you join in on April 26th for that event. And we will absolutely ship to you in London, Callie. Absolutely. We will get it to you, no problem at all. So the last question from Callie, and I think I may know the answer to this one, is what advice would you give to fellow alum? And I think it's going to come back to the kindness and the empathy comment, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I would say two things. One, absolutely use the superpower of kindness and empathy. But what I would say to alum is stay connected. I enjoy getting the Acadia Bulletin, I enjoy getting the electronic correspondence. It doesn't matter if you don't apply or anything, reply, but stay connected. Stay connected with the Acadia alumni. Use that network. It'll bring a smile to your face, those smiles, a few seconds every day add up. So, I would just say stay connected to your Acadia family. That's what I would say.
And that was not a prepaid announcement, folks. That came completely off the cuff and with genuine from Dr. Jane. So, thank you. Thank you to everybody who's on the call this evening. For the folks who weren't able to make it, we have recorded and we will be broadcasting that live and wide and broad. For you, Trevor, thank you so much for the time that you've shared with us this evening, and your insight and your experiences and your sense of humor, your sense of authenticity, and that great smile. And I will tell you that it's not a question, but in the chat function, we have from a class member of 1992, you haven't changed a bit, Trevor.
Yeah, so other than the jacket doesn't fit. Yeah.
So like I say, thank you, Trevor. We'll be in touch again very soon. I'll be sending you some swag for your daughters. And it was just great. It was great to see you, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, it was a real honor, and I'm honored that the alumni would think of me. And thank you very much for a lovely evening. It was so nice to see a few of you folks online, and I wish you all the best. Look me up if you come to PEI.
Absolutely.